The richest people are never the ones who keep their last dollar. They're the ones who still find the courage to give it away. The rain had been falling over downtown Chicago since early afternoon, coating sidewalks in a silver sheen that reflected traffic lights like broken pieces of glass. Most people hurried past with their heads lowered, clutching umbrellas and paper coffee cups, too busy to notice anyone outside their own little world. Claire Bennett walked more slowly than everyone else. Her worn canvas sneakers had soaked through nearly an hour ago, and every step made a quiet squish against the pavement. She pulled her faded gray coat tighter around herself, though it did little against the chilly October wind sweeping between the tall buildings. Inside her pocket rested exactly one crumpled $1 bill. She touched it every few minutes without thinking, almost like reassuring herself it was still there. That single dollar was supposed to buy the cheapest cup of coffee she could find before tomorrow's job interview. She hadn't eaten since the previous afternoon, but coffee felt more important. Coffee might help her stay awake. Coffee might help her make a better first impression. Coffee might help her believe tomorrow could finally be different. After 6 months of rejection letters, temporary jobs that disappeared overnight, and unpaid bills stacked on the tiny kitchen table inside her rented room, hope had become something she measured in very small pieces. One interview, one phone call, $1. She stopped beneath the awning of a neighborhood pharmacy to escape the heavier rain and glanced toward the convenience store across the street. A bright sign advertised fresh sandwiches for $3.99. She smiled to herself with quiet amusement. $3 might as well have been $3,000. As the traffic light changed, Claire crossed toward the train station entrance where commuters streamed in and out without slowing down. Near the concrete steps sat an elderly man wrapped in a thin blanket, his weathered hands trembling as he stared at an empty paper cup resting beside him. Most people never even looked in his direction. Some deliberately turned their heads away. Claire slowed. She wasn't wealthy enough to help anyone. She wasn't even stable enough to help herself. Yet something about the man's tired blue eyes reminded her of her grandfather, who had always insisted that kindness cost less than regret. She reached into her pocket and unfolded the last dollar she owned. Her fingers hesitated for only a heartbeat. Tomorrow suddenly felt very far away compared to someone who was hungry today. She knelt beside him with a gentle smile. "I wish it were more," she said quietly as she placed the bill into his shaking hand. The old man's eyes widened. "Young lady, this is your last dollar, isn't it?" Claire laughed softly, surprised by the accuracy of his guess. "Maybe," she admitted. "But right now you need it more than I do." The man stared at her for several seconds before carefully folding the bill instead of spending it immediately. His eyes shimmered with gratitude deeper than words could express. "Then let me give you something too." He reached into the pocket of his worn coat and pulled out an old silver dollar coin. Its surface faded from decades of use. Pressing it gently into Claire's palm, he closed her fingers around it. "Keep this close. Real kindness always finds its way home." Claire smiled politely, assuming it was simply an old keepsake that meant something to him. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll take good care of it." Neither of them noticed the black SUV parked half a block away until its tinted rear window lowered just an inch. Inside sat Ethan Carter, one of the youngest billionaires in America, dressed not in an expensive suit, but in a simple navy jacket and baseball cap that made him look like any other man waiting for traffic to move. He had watched the entire exchange without saying a single word. His driver glanced into the rearview mirror. "Sir, should we go?" Ethan never answered immediately. His eyes remained fixed on Claire as she walked away into the rain, completely unaware anyone had witnessed what she had done. She disappeared into the crowd carrying nothing except an old silver coin and the quiet dignity of someone who had chosen compassion over comfort. Ethan slowly closed the window, but his thoughts refused to leave the young woman behind. For months he had searched for proof that genuine kindness still existed in a world obsessed with appearances. He had expected speeches, social media cameras, and carefully staged charity events. Instead, he had just watched a hungry stranger give away the only dollar standing between herself and tomorrow. And for the first time in years, Ethan Carter realized the answer he had been searching for had been standing in the rain all along. Claire slipped the old silver dollar into the small inside pocket of her coat, never imagining that the worn coin would become the most valuable thing she owned. By the time she reached her apartment building on the west side of Chicago, The rain had turned into a steady drizzle, and the old brick structure looked even more tired than usual. The hallway lights flickered as she climbed 3 flights of narrow stairs, careful not to wake the elderly neighbor who always fell asleep in the chair outside his door. Her apartment measured barely 300 square feet, with a tiny kitchenette, a folding table, and a single window overlooking an alley where delivery trucks parked before sunrise. She placed her damp coat on the chair, opened the nearly empty refrigerator, and smiled faintly at its contents. 1 bottle of water, half a carton of milk that would expire tomorrow, a single apple beginning to wrinkle around the edges. She picked up the apple, thought about eating it, then quietly placed it back. Tomorrow mattered more. She needed to look confident during the interview, even if confidence had to survive on an empty stomach. Sitting beside the window, Claire opened a notebook filled with handwritten interview questions. Every page carried small notes in blue ink, reminders she had written after countless unsuccessful interviews. Smile before answering. Maintain eye contact. Do not apologize for being unemployed. Believe you deserve the opportunity. She repeated each sentence softly until exhaustion blurred the words together. Across town, the top floor of Carter Global Headquarters overlooked the entire skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. Ethan Carter stood alone in his office, still wearing the same simple jacket from earlier that afternoon. His executive assistant, Rebecca Collins, entered quietly carrying tomorrow's board meeting schedule. She noticed immediately that something was different. Ethan rarely stood staring out the window for this long. "Everything is ready for tomorrow," she said gently. "The foundation committee is expecting your final recommendation." Ethan remained silent for another moment before speaking. "How many candidates are left?" Rebecca glanced at her tablet. 7 finalists. Every one of them has impressive credentials, advanced degrees, years of nonprofit leadership, and excellent public reputations. Ethan slowly turned toward her. "None of that tells me who they really are." Rebecca had worked beside him for nearly 8 years. She understood exactly what he meant. Public generosity was easy. Cameras change people. Awards change people. Money changed people. Character only appeared when nobody was watching. Ethan walked back to his desk and opened a leather notebook. Inside was a single handwritten sentence from his late mother. "Wealth is measured by what you give away when nobody expects you to give anything at all." He gently traced the faded handwriting with his fingertips before closing the cover. "I think I found someone today," he said quietly. Rebecca looked surprised. "One of the finalists?" Ethan shook his head. "No, someone who does not even know we exist." Meanwhile, Claire set her alarm for 5:30 in the morning. She carefully ironed her only navy blazer using an old travel iron that heated unevenly, hoping the wrinkles would disappear before sunrise. She checked the address of the interview one final time. Carter Community Foundation, Administrative Program Assistant. She smiled to herself. The position was probably one of hundreds she had applied for over the past 6 months. She did not even remember submitting the application. Still, it represented another chance, and another chance was enough to keep going. Before going to bed, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the old silver dollar. The metal reflected the soft glow of the bedside lamp. On one side, years of wear had nearly erased the design. On the other, a tiny engraved compass remained visible. Claire ran her thumb across it and remembered the old man's words. "Real kindness always finds its way home." She smiled politely at the memory, then placed the coin beside the framed photograph of her parents. "I hope you were right," she whispered into the quiet room. Outside, the rain finally stopped, leaving the streets washed clean beneath the city lights. At almost that same moment, Ethan signed a single authorization form and slid it across his desk toward Rebecca. "Invite her to the final interview," he said. Rebecca scanned the name at the top of the page. "Claire Bennett. Should I tell Human Resources why?" she asked. Ethan looked once more toward the dark skyline beyond the glass. "No," he answered with calm certainty. "I want to know if the woman I saw in the rain is the same woman who walks through our front doors tomorrow. If kindness is truly part of who she is, it will still be there even when she believes nobody is watching." Claire woke before her alarm, the pale light of dawn barely slipping through the single window of her apartment. For a moment, she lay perfectly still, listening to the familiar sounds of the city coming alive beyond the brick walls. Delivery trucks rumbled through the alley. A train horn echoed somewhere in the distance. Pipes inside the old building groaned as neighbors started their mornings. She closed her eyes for one more second before quietly whispering, "Today has to be different." She dressed carefully, smoothing every wrinkle from her navy blazer before pinning her hair back in the small bathroom mirror. The mirror had a crack running through one corner, but she had learned long ago to look past imperfections. After all, she had spent months asking employers to do exactly the same. She picked up the apple from the refrigerator, considered eating it, then slipped it into her bag instead. If the interview lasted longer than expected, she might need it afterward. Before leaving, she reached for the old silver dollar resting beside the photograph of her parents. She hesitated for a moment before placing the coin inside her blazer pocket. Somehow it made her feel less alone. The downtown train was crowded with commuters dressed in tailored suits, polished shoes, and expensive watches. Claire noticed none of them seemed to look at one another. Everyone stared at phones or laptops, rushing toward another busy day. As the train slowed at the next station, an exhausted young mother climbed aboard carrying a sleepy little boy while struggling to balance a folded stroller. Before anyone else reacted, Claire stood immediately. "Please, take my seat," she said with a warm smile. The mother looked relieved. "Are you sure?" Claire nodded without hesitation. "Absolutely." The little boy smiled shyly as they sat down, hugging a worn stuffed dinosaur against his chest. Claire spent the rest of the ride standing, holding the rail as the train gently swayed through the city. A man near the opposite door watched the exchange over the top of his newspaper. His gray jacket and reading glasses made him look like any ordinary commuter, but beneath the quiet disguise was one of Carter Global's senior security directors. He lowered the newspaper just enough to send a brief text message. Subject remains consistent. Natural kindness. No performance detected. Several blocks away, Ethan read the message while drinking black coffee in his office. A faint smile appeared before disappearing just as quickly. "Thank you," he murmured, setting the phone aside. "Keep watching, but do not interfere." Claire arrived 15 minutes early at Carter Community Foundation, an elegant limestone building connected to the company's headquarters by a glass skybridge. The spacious lobby felt intimidating, with polished marble floors, fresh flowers, and a grand staircase that curved toward the executive offices above. She quietly checked in with the receptionist before taking a seat beside several other applicants. They looked impressive. Designer briefcases rested beside polished shoes. Confident conversations filled the waiting area as candidates discussed graduate degrees, international volunteer projects, and executive recommendations. Claire listened politely while smoothing invisible wrinkles from her resume. For a brief moment, doubt crept back into her heart. Maybe she did not belong here after all. Just then, an elderly maintenance worker entered the lobby carrying a heavy box of office supplies. As he reached the staircase, one side of the box slipped, sending folders, envelopes, and notebooks scattering across the polished floor. Several applicants glanced over before immediately returning to their conversations. One sighed impatiently, worried the delay might affect the interview schedule. Claire was already kneeling beside the fallen supplies. "Let me help you," she said gently. Together they gathered every folder, every pen, and every loose sheet of paper. "Thank you, young lady," the man said with grateful eyes. "These old hands are not what they used to be." Claire smiled. Everyone needs a little help sometimes. The man noticed the silver dollar peeking from her blazer pocket as she stood. His eyes lingered on it for just a second before he nodded thoughtfully and carried the box toward the elevator. Neither of them realized a discreet security camera above the reception desk had captured the entire moment. Upstairs, the footage appeared instantly on a private monitor inside Ethan's office. He watched Claire without speaking. There was no audience around her. No cameras she knew about. No executive standing nearby to impress. She had simply helped because someone needed help. Ethan leaned back slowly, remembering his mother's favorite saying once again. Character reveals itself in the smallest moments. Rebecca entered carrying a folder filled with interview schedules. "The panel is ready whenever you are," she said. Ethan closed the monitor and picked up the folder with Claire Bennett's name on top. "Good," he replied calmly. "Because I think today we stop evaluating resumes and start discovering who truly deserves an opportunity." The receptionist smiled warmly as she looked toward the waiting area. Claire Bennett. Claire stood immediately, smoothing her blazer before gathering her resume and notebook. That is me. Please follow me. She took a slow breath and followed the receptionist through a bright hallway lined with photographs of community projects, neighborhood food drives, scholarship ceremonies, and volunteers planting trees across Chicago. The walls did not celebrate wealth. They celebrated people. Somehow that eased the nervousness in her chest. The receptionist stopped outside a modern conference room with frosted glass walls. Someone will be with you in just a moment. Claire stepped inside and quietly admired the simple elegance of the room. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a polished wooden table with 6 neatly arranged chairs. A pitcher of water, several notebooks, and a small vase filled with white lilies rested in the center. She placed her resume on the table and sat with both hands folded neatly in her lap, silently rehearsing answers she had practiced the night before. A few moments later, the door opened again. Claire looked up, then froze for the briefest second. The man who entered looked strangely familiar. He wore a tailored navy suit instead of the casual jacket she remembered, yet there was something unmistakable about his calm blue eyes. It took another heartbeat before recognition settled in. He was the man she had noticed sitting inside the black sport utility vehicle on the rainy afternoon outside the train station. At the time, she had barely given him a second thought. Now he carried a leather portfolio and greeted her with an easy smile. "Good morning," he said. "I hope you have not been waiting too long." Claire quickly stood. "Not at all. I am Ethan," he continued, extending his hand. "I work with the foundation." Claire shook his hand politely. "It is nice to meet you." His expression remained perfectly composed, revealing nothing that suggested he already knew exactly who she was. "Would you mind if we talk for a few minutes before the interview panel arrives?" Claire nodded. "Of course." Ethan took the chair across from her instead of the seat at the head of the table. "Tell me something that is not written on your resume." The question surprised her. She had expected discussions about software programs, office experience, or scheduling skills. Instead, she looked down for a second before answering honestly. "I think people become stronger when someone believes in them before they have any reason to." Ethan leaned back slightly. "Why do you believe that?" Claire smiled faintly. "Because someone believed in me once." She glanced toward the window overlooking the city. "My parents never had much money, but they always treated every person with dignity. They used to say that respect should never depend on someone's bank account." Ethan listened carefully without interrupting. Every answer felt natural, never rehearsed. "If you were responsible for helping a family with only $100, he asked, "how would you spend it?" Claire thought quietly for several seconds. "I would ask them what they need first." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You would not decide for them?" "No," she answered gently. "People already struggling have enough strangers making decisions for them. Sometimes listening is worth more than money." Ethan almost smiled. That answer sounded exactly like something his mother would have said years ago. Before he could ask another question, there was a soft knock on the door. Rebecca entered carrying several folders. "The executive committee is almost ready." Ethan stood. "Thank you." Claire assumed Rebecca was another member of the hiring team. She had no reason to think otherwise. Ethan turned back toward her. "Would you excuse me for just a few minutes? The formal interview will begin shortly." "Certainly," Claire replied. As soon as the conference room door closed behind him, Ethan and Rebecca continued walking toward the executive boardroom. Rebecca lowered her voice. "She has no idea who you are." Ethan gave a quiet shake of his head. "That is exactly how I wanted it. You could simply offer her the position now." "No." His answer came gently but firmly. "If she is going to become part of this organization, she deserves to earn it honestly. Kindness opened the door. Character will determine whether she walks through it." A few minutes later, Claire remained alone inside the conference room, completely unaware that behind the mirrored glass overlooking the room, several members of Carter Global's executive leadership had already begun quietly observing the woman whose simple act of generosity had unexpectedly become the center of one billionaire's most important decision. The conference room door opened once again, but this time 5 executives entered together, each carrying a tablet and a folder. Claire immediately stood, offering a polite smile as they introduced themselves one by one. Ethan entered last. Instead of sitting beside her as he had before, he walked calmly to the chair at the very end of the long table. Claire noticed several of the executives glance toward him before taking their own seats, but she assumed he was simply coordinating the interview. Rebecca smiled warmly. "Claire, thank you for coming today. We appreciate your time. Claire nodded. Thank you for inviting me. The interview began with familiar questions about organization, communication, and problem solving. Claire answered honestly, never pretending to know something she did not. When she lacked experience, she admitted it. When she described past challenges, she focused on what she had learned instead of what she had lost. Nearly 30 minutes passed before one of the senior executives leaned forward. Miss Bennett, he said, imagine you are managing one of our community programs. You have funding for only one neighborhood, but two communities need help equally. How would you decide? Claire remained quiet for several seconds. I would visit both communities before making any decision. The executive nodded. What if there is no time? Claire looked around the room. Then I would ask for help from people who know those neighborhoods better than I do. I do not believe leadership means pretending to have every answer. A few executives exchanged subtle smiles. Ethan remained silent, observing every word, every pause, every expression. Finally, Rebecca closed her folder. One last question. Claire looked toward her. What motivates you to keep helping other people when your own circumstances are difficult? Claire lowered her eyes for a moment before answering. Because I know what it feels like when someone chooses not to help. The room became perfectly still. There were moments these past few months when one kind conversation changed my entire day. Sometimes people think generosity has to be expensive. I do not believe that. A smile, a few minutes of patience, listening without judging someone. Those things matter too. If I ever reach a better place in life, I hope I never forget what these months have taught me. Silence settled across the room. It was not uncomfortable. It was thoughtful. Ethan slowly stood from his chair. Every executive around the table immediately rose with him. Claire blinked in confusion. She looked from one person to another, unsure what was happening. Rebecca smiled respectfully. Mr. Carter. The others echoed, almost in unison. Good morning, Mr. Carter. Claire's heartbeat seemed to stop. Her eyes moved slowly toward Ethan as realization spread across her face. Mr. Carter. Carter Community Foundation. Carter Global. The names connected all at once. The man sitting across from her only minutes earlier was not simply another employee. He was Ethan Carter, the billionaire founder whose photograph had appeared countless times in business magazines and local newspapers. She had never expected to meet him, much less spend half an hour speaking to him as though he were an ordinary colleague. Ethan looked at her with the same calm expression she had seen on the rainy afternoon outside the train station. Please, he said gently, noticing her uncertainty. There is no reason to be uncomfortable. Claire could barely find her voice. I did not realize. Ethan smiled softly. I know. He walked around the table until he stood only a few feet away. Miss Bennett, I owe you an explanation. Every person in the room remained silent. The day it rained outside Union Station, Ethan continued. I saw you give away the last dollar in your pocket to a man you believed needed it more than you did. You did not know anyone was watching. You expected nothing in return. That moment stayed with me. Claire stared at him, completely speechless. Ethan continued quietly. Over the following days, I asked my team to observe only one thing. Whether that kindness was a single emotional decision or simply the way you live your life. Every report told the same story. You helped people without seeking recognition. You treated strangers with respect. You acted exactly the same whether anyone noticed or not. Claire felt warmth rise to her cheeks as she struggled to process everything she was hearing. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and placed a familiar folded $1 bill on the conference table. The gentleman outside the station never spent your dollar, he said. He works with our foundation as a volunteer. That afternoon was never arranged. It was completely real. But after witnessing what you did, I asked him to keep this bill for me because I wanted to remember the exact moment I discovered someone whose character could not be measured by a resume. Claire remained standing, unable to take her eyes off the folded $1 bill resting on the polished conference table. It looked ordinary, just another worn piece of paper currency, yet somehow it now carried the weight of everything that had happened during the past week. She slowly looked back at Ethan. You remembered my dollar? She asked softly. Ethan nodded. I remembered your choice. The room remained silent as he continued. Money can be replaced. Character cannot. That afternoon you believed no one would ever know what you did. That is exactly why it mattered. Claire took a slow breath, still trying to absorb the unexpected revelation. I never gave it away because I thought someone might notice. I know, Ethan replied. That is precisely the reason we are having this conversation. Rebecca slid a folder across the table toward Claire. Miss Bennett, before today's interview began, the executive committee had already reviewed every qualification, every reference, and every assessment. You met the professional requirements. What we could not measure on paper was integrity. Mr. Carter believed integrity deserved just as much attention as experience. Claire carefully opened the folder. Inside was not an employment contract for the administrative assistant position she had applied for. Instead, the title read Community Innovation Coordinator. She looked up in confusion. I do not understand. Ethan smiled gently. Because that position no longer exists. Claire blinked. What do you mean? After watching how naturally you connect with people, I realized we were trying to hire you for the wrong job. We do not need another administrator. We need someone who understands the people we serve because she has lived beside them. Claire looked back down at the folder, her hands trembling slightly. The salary listed on the first page was nearly 3 times what she had expected. Health insurance, retirement benefits, paid education, housing assistance, and leadership training were all included. She stared at the page in disbelief before quietly saying, "There must be some mistake." Ethan slowly shook his head. No mistake. But there are candidates with master's degrees. Yes. People with years of nonprofit experience. Yes. People far more qualified than I am. Ethan folded his hands together. Perhaps on paper. Claire lowered her eyes again. I have spent months wondering whether I was falling behind everyone else. Ethan answered with quiet sincerity. Sometimes life teaches lessons that no university ever can. One of the senior executives smiled. Mr. Carter often reminds us that we can teach procedures. We can teach software. We can teach management. It is much harder to teach someone how to genuinely care about another human being. Claire felt tears gathering, but quickly blinked them away. She did not want emotion to speak louder than gratitude. Ethan noticed anyway. There is one condition, he said. Claire looked up immediately. Anything. He smiled. Never allow this building to convince you that titles make people more valuable. If you ever begin treating someone differently because of their income, education, or position, I expect you to remind yourself of the woman who stood in the rain with only $1. Claire laughed quietly through the emotion filling her heart. I promise. Ethan reached into his briefcase and removed another small object wrapped inside a velvet pouch. He handed it across the table. Claire carefully opened it and found the old silver dollar the elderly man had given her. How did you? Ethan smiled. He asked me to return it personally if I believed you had found the place where kindness belongs. Claire gently turned the coin over in her hand until she noticed something she had missed before. Along the edge, almost invisible beneath decades of wear, were 4 engraved words. Always follow true north. She looked up in surprise. Ethan nodded. That coin belonged to my mother. She carried it for more than 30 years. Before she passed away, she gave it to the foundation's first volunteer and asked him to pass it on only when he met someone who still believed compassion was more important than convenience. Claire looked down at the coin again, suddenly understanding why the elderly man had smiled with such quiet confidence that rainy afternoon. Ethan stood and extended his hand once more, but this time it was not an introduction. It was an invitation. Welcome to Carter Community Foundation, Claire. I believe this is only the beginning of something much bigger than either of us imagined. Claire's first weeks at Carter Community Foundation passed faster than she could have imagined. Every morning, she crossed the same marble lobby that had once intimidated her, but now she greeted the reception staff by name, stopped to chat with volunteers delivering donated supplies, and never walked past the maintenance team without thanking them for their work. It did not take long for people throughout the building to notice that her kindness had not changed simply because her circumstances had. If anything, it had become even more intentional. Instead of remaining behind a desk, Claire spent most of her days visiting neighborhood food banks, after-school learning centers, family shelters, and small community organizations that had quietly served Chicago for decades without much public attention. She listened far more than she spoke, filling notebook after notebook with ideas shared by local teachers, retired veterans, single parents, and nonprofit volunteers. Whenever someone thanked her for coming, she always gave the same answer. You are the experts. I am only here to learn. Ethan watched her progress from a respectful distance. Although they met regularly to discuss foundation projects, He never treated her differently from any other department leader during meetings. He challenged her ideas, asked difficult questions, and expected thoughtful solutions. Claire appreciated that more than she could explain. She had not wanted charity. She had wanted an opportunity to prove she belonged. Little by little, mutual respect grew into genuine friendship. Some afternoons they stayed after meetings discussing books, neighborhood history, or stories about the people they had met during community visits. Ethan discovered that Claire remembered every person's name after meeting them only once. Claire discovered that beneath Ethan's reputation as one of the country's most successful business leaders was a man who quietly carried handwritten notes from his late mother inside the same leather notebook every single day. Yet outside the foundation, not everyone welcomed Claire's rapid rise. Rumors began circulating through corporate offices and industry circles. Some employees whispered that no one advanced so quickly without special treatment. Others assumed Ethan had hired her simply because of the emotional story surrounding the $1 bill. Claire tried to ignore the comments at first, reminding herself that people often judged what they did not understand. Then one Friday morning, everything changed. A regional business magazine published an online article featuring Carter Community Foundation's newest leadership initiatives. The headline praised Ethan's innovative vision, but the comment section quickly turned cruel. Anonymous readers questioned Claire's qualifications. Some claimed she had been selected because she had impressed the billionaire personally. Others suggested the foundation had staged the rainy afternoon outside Union Station as a publicity campaign. Claire stared at the screen in silence, reading each accusation more slowly than the last. None of the comments came from people who knew her. None of them had ever visited the neighborhood she served. Yet every sentence somehow found its way beneath her confidence. She quietly closed her laptop before anyone noticed the tears gathering in her eyes. Later that afternoon, Ethan knocked gently on the open door of her office. "Do you have a few minutes?" Claire forced a small smile. "Of course." He immediately sensed something was wrong. "You read the article." She nodded. "I thought I was stronger than this." Ethan pulled out a chair and sat across from her, just as he had during their first conversation before the interview. "Do you know what I see when I read those comments?" Claire shook her head. "People who believe they already know the whole story." Ethan smiled gently. "Exactly. They are judging a single page without reading the rest of the book." Claire looked down at her hands. "Maybe they are right about one thing." Ethan waited patiently. "Without meeting you, without that rainy afternoon, I never would have been here." Ethan answered without hesitation. "Without your character, you would not still be here." He let the words settle before continuing. "Every promotion you have received has been approved unanimously by leaders who answer to measurable results, not personal feelings. Your projects are succeeding because communities trust you. They trust you because you earned that trust." Claire remained quiet. Ethan stood and walked toward the window overlooking downtown Chicago. "Success has an unexpected cost," he said softly. "The higher you climb, the more strangers believe they know your journey." Claire slowly joined him by the window. "How do you stop caring?" Ethan smiled faintly. "You do not. You simply decide whose opinion has earned the right to matter." Before Claire could answer, her phone vibrated with an incoming email from the Foundation Communications Department. The subject line read Emergency Board Meeting Monday Morning. Attached beneath it was another message that made her heart sink. A formal complaint had been submitted requesting an independent review of her appointment to the foundation. Someone wanted the board to investigate whether she had received unfair favoritism. And for the first time since walking through Carter Global's front doors, Claire wondered whether the opportunity she had worked so hard to deserve was about to disappear. Monday morning arrived beneath clear autumn skies, but Claire felt none of the sunshine as she entered the executive boardroom. Every seat around the polished table was occupied. Board members, legal advisors, senior executives, and foundation directors quietly reviewed documents while speaking in hushed voices. Claire took the chair reserved for her, keeping her posture steady despite the uncertainty weighing heavily on her heart. Ethan sat at the opposite end of the room, his expression calm and unreadable. He gave her a small, reassuring nod before the meeting officially began. The chairwoman adjusted her glasses and opened the first folder. "We are here today to review a formal complaint alleging that Miss Claire Bennett received preferential treatment during her appointment to Carter Community Foundation." The room remained silent. Our responsibility is not to respond to rumors, she continued. Our responsibility is to examine facts. One by one, department directors presented detailed reports covering every project Claire had supervised since joining the foundation. Charts displayed increased volunteer participation. Financial summaries showed improved efficiency without increasing administrative costs. Community surveys revealed record levels of public trust. Independent nonprofit partners described Claire as someone who listened before acting and consistently placed neighborhood needs ahead of publicity. None of the evidence reflected favoritism. Every report reflected measurable results. Even so, one board member spoke carefully. While Miss Bennett's performance has clearly exceeded expectations, public perception remains important. The original complaint suggests her appointment itself may have been influenced by Mr. Carter's personal judgment. The room grew quiet once again. Ethan slowly stood. That statement is correct, he said without hesitation. Several heads turned toward him. Claire looked at him with surprise. Ethan continued calmly. My personal judgment absolutely influenced my decision to invite Miss Bennett to a final interview. Before anyone could react, he placed a small glass display case on the conference table. Inside rested the carefully preserved $1 bill. Beside it lay the old silver dollar coin engraved with the words, "Always follow true north." These are the two reasons I first noticed Claire Bennett, he said. Not because she impressed investors. Not because she had powerful connections. Not because she knew who I was. She had none of those advantages. He paused briefly before continuing. She believed no one was watching when she gave away the last dollar she owned. She expected nothing in return. That single decision reminded me of the values upon which this foundation was built. The chairwoman looked toward him thoughtfully. Character alone cannot justify an executive appointment. Ethan nodded. I agree completely. He then handed each board member a thick report. That is why every promotion, every responsibility, every leadership opportunity Miss Bennett has received has been evaluated independently by multiple departments using measurable performance standards. Remove my name from every page, and the outcome remains exactly the same. The room filled with the quiet sound of papers turning. Charts, evaluations, financial audits, and community impact reports all reached the same conclusion. Claire had consistently exceeded every expectation. The legal advisor finally spoke. The independent review found no evidence of improper hiring practices, no conflict with foundation policy, and no indication that Miss Bennett received advantages unavailable to other qualified employees after her appointment. The complaint was officially dismissed. Relief washed over Claire, but before she could fully process the moment, Ethan addressed the room once more. There is something else I have never shared publicly. Everyone looked toward him. His voice softened. The rainy afternoon outside Union Station was the anniversary of my mother's passing. Before she died, she told me that if I ever questioned whether genuine kindness still existed, I should stop looking inside boardrooms and begin looking on ordinary streets. She believed the greatest generosity always came from people who had the least to spare. Ethan gently picked up the old silver dollar coin. For years I wondered whether her words still held true. Claire answered that question without ever knowing she was being observed. The room remained completely silent. Several board members smiled with quiet understanding. Claire felt tears gather again, but this time they came not from uncertainty, but from gratitude. As the meeting concluded, the chairwoman stood and addressed everyone present. Effective immediately, I would like the minutes to reflect not only that Miss Bennett's appointment has been unanimously affirmed, but also that the foundation will launch a new national initiative inspired by the principle demonstrated through her actions. Ethan turned toward Claire with a warm smile. The program will support neighborhood organizations built upon everyday acts of compassion rather than extraordinary wealth. Claire looked at the preserved $1 bill resting beneath the glass and finally understood that the smallest choice she had ever made had quietly grown into something capable of changing thousands of lives, even though she had never expected it to change her own. Nearly 1 year later, the first autumn leaves drifted across the courtyard outside Carter Community Foundation as hundreds of volunteers, neighborhood leaders, teachers, small business owners, and families gathered for the opening ceremony of a new national initiative. Banners stretched across the entrance carrying 4 simple words that had quietly become the heart of the foundation's mission. The Last Dollar Initiative. There were no oversized photographs of executives, no giant portraits celebrating success. Instead, the walls displayed stories of ordinary people whose everyday acts of kindness had transformed lives across America. A waitress who paid for a stranger's meal. A mechanic who repaired a family's car without charging them. A retired teacher who spent every Saturday helping children learn to read. Claire walked slowly through the exhibits, greeting familiar faces who had become friends over the past year. The neighborhoods she had once visited carrying only a notebook now stood beside her as equal partners, each organization stronger than it had been before. The foundation had expanded into dozens of cities, proving that compassion could grow just as powerfully as any business investment. Ethan watched from a short distance, smiling as he noticed something that had never changed. Claire still stopped to thank every volunteer setting up chairs. She still remembered names. She still listened more than she spoke. Success had never replaced humility. It had simply given her more opportunities to practice it. As the ceremony began, the chairwoman welcomed the audience before inviting Claire to the stage. Standing behind the podium, she looked across the crowd and paused for a moment. A year ago, she began softly, I believed generosity belonged to people with resources I could never imagine having. I thought kindness had to wait until life became easier. I was wrong. Sometimes the smallest gift carries the greatest hope because it costs us something real. The audience listened in complete silence. This initiative does not exist because one person changed the world. It exists because thousands of ordinary people choose every day to make someone else's burden a little lighter. That is the kind of wealth every person can possess. Warm applause filled the courtyard. After the ceremony ended, guests slowly explored the exhibits while musicians played gentle acoustic melodies nearby. Ethan quietly approached Claire. There is one more display I would like you to see. Curious, Claire followed him into a smaller gallery tucked behind the main hall. The room was peaceful, illuminated by soft afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows. At the center stood a single glass case. Inside rested the preserved $1 bill she had given away on that rainy afternoon. Beside it lay the old silver dollar engraved with the words, "Always follow true north." A small bronze plaque beneath them read, "The first investment that changed everything." Claire covered her mouth as emotion filled her eyes. You kept them together. Ethan nodded. They belong together. One represents what you gave. The other represents what was entrusted to you. Together they remind us that kindness always returns, although rarely in the way we expect. Claire smiled through quiet tears. I still cannot believe all of this began with one simple decision. Ethan looked at her warmly. It did not begin with a decision. It began with the kind of person you chose to become long before I ever met you. For a few peaceful moments, neither of them spoke. Outside, laughter echoed through the courtyard as children played beneath colorful autumn trees, while volunteers served warm meals to guests. Ethan finally reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small navy box. Claire looked at him with gentle surprise as he opened it, revealing an elegant ring that caught the afternoon light. Claire Bennett, he said softly. You reminded me that success means very little if it is not shared with others. You restored my faith in the values my mother spent her life teaching me. Every day since that rainy afternoon has convinced me that the greatest partnership is built on respect, trust, and kindness. I cannot promise that every day will be easy, but I can promise that every decision we make will always point toward the same true north. Will you marry me? Claire looked from the ring to the preserved $1 bill resting beneath the glass. She remembered the empty refrigerator, the worn apartment, the rain, the old man with gentle eyes, and the moment she believed she had given away the last thing she possessed. Instead, she realized she had planted the first seed of an entirely different future. Smiling through joyful tears, she nodded. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Ethan slipped the ring gently onto her finger as warm applause erupted behind them. Neither had noticed that the foundation staff, board members, volunteers, and the elderly man from the train station had quietly gathered outside the gallery doors, smiling as they witnessed the moment. The elderly volunteer tipped his hat with quiet satisfaction before walking away into the autumn sunlight, knowing his promise had finally come true. Real kindness had indeed found its way home, and the greatest fortune either of them would ever hold had never been measured in dollars at all, but in the simple courage to give when keeping everything would have been easier.